Firstly, I'd like to say that I bring greetings to you all from Zera Abraham, our congregation, and also from Beit Lechem in Kenya with Elijah and Irene. They will be thinking about us this weekend, they say. You know, you're not alone. You are not alone. And that's the main thing I want to get across to you this morning. In fact, I want to share with you today the word of encouragement. You know, God gave me this a few weeks ago, and everything seems to have fit round it as we have been here now. So I want us to turn to Daniel, the book of Daniel, and Daniel chapter 6. I'm going to read it so we get into the picture of it. In chapter 6 it says, "It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps, because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. And the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. But they could not find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him." You know, when they tried to examine Yeshua, you know, in those days between his going up to Jerusalem and his crucifixion, they could find no sin in him. And here we have a righteous man here as well. Then these men said, "We will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God." Then these commissioners and satraps came to agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows: "King Darius, live forever." There's a way of looking up to their boss, isn't it? "All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man, besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked." Therefore King Darius signed the document, that is the injunction. And when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open towards Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Cut a long story short, alright, these men were watching for him. They deliberately watched for him, knowing that he would do this. But Daniel couldn't care less. He was that certain he was going to be praying to his God, so was his faith. We are told that Daniel had a different spirit than all the others. In this age, Darius came to the throne of Persia at the age of 62 years old. 62 years he's been. He appointed 120 satraps to rule over the kingdom. Now, a satrap was a Middle Eastern term for a provincial governor. And they had 3 administrators over them, and Daniel was obviously one of them. We're told Daniel had a different spirit than all the others, and the king planned to make Daniel ruler over the kingdom. So these others were jealous. They were jealous of Daniel. And some of the satraps plotted against him. They tricked the king into signing this statute. And as I read there, when Daniel learned that a written decree had been issued, he went into his house, where his window to his open room opened toward Jerusalem, and prayed 3 times, with prayer and thanks for God. And the satraps who plotted against Daniel went to the king and reported what they had seen. Daniel was one of a few young men who were brought from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. And in Daniel 1:4 we are told that these young men were youths, probably in their teens, without defect, handsome, proficient in all wisdom, knowledgeable, intelligent, and capable of serving in the king's palace. Well, I was handsome at one time. Whether wisdom, I'm not sure. I couldn't fulfill all of those things. He grew up into adulthood in the palace, but he never forgot the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Echad, and Jacob. There have been many others in the scriptures, like Daniel, that stood alone, great and against great danger. And this morning, 2 stand out in my mind. And the first was obviously Melech David. And I love this story. And I will go on and tell it the more I get the opportunity. Because David was only a boy of 17, looking after the sheep. We all know the story, don't we, of it. But David was asked by his father to take some food to his brothers who were with the army fighting against the Philistines. He knew where the camp was, and his father said to him, "You go, take this food to your brothers." There was no army catering back in those days by the sound of it. All right, they had to fend for themselves, and so their family sent the food to them. And so David goes off and he arrives at the camp, and there's all this murmuring going on in the camp. And his brother said to him, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, Dad's told me to bring this for you, "All right, thank you, off you go then." But David was listening to the murmurings. He could hear all the mumbling going on. And then at this particular time, this giant of a man comes out and bellows across the valley to the armies of Israel. Send out a man that I might and you know the story. And David's standing there intrigued. He should be on his way now, but he's standing there intrigued. And he's saying to people around him, the soldiers around him, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he defies the armies of God?" And you can imagine the older brother here, can't you? "Shh, you be quiet and go home. That's where your place is. You go home." But David continued until it was heard in the king's tent that this young boy was saying. So the King Saul, sent for him. And he comes into the king's tent. He's brought into the king's tent. And again, if we think about, modern times, or whether it was the same back then, there would be the generals all around the king, and they would have maps on the table, all looking at these maps and deciding and what they were going to do, and who was going to go out and fight this man, and because they had no idea what to do. And David says, "Don't worry, your majesty, I've dealt with this kind of thing before." This 17-year-old boy with these great generals, great soldiers, they had to have been to reach the rank of a general. And the king. And something in Saul saw something in David that he had many years ago. He saw the Spirit of God upon him. And this one young man stood out amongst all of this army. We know that Saul tried his armour on, and his armour was too big for David, and he said, no, let me just do my own thing. He says, "I know." And he said, "I've got my sling, and I can go and do it." So young David goes out and he stands before the armies of the Philistines. And then Goliath comes out. And he's probably standing there with his spear and his shield, waiting for someone to come. And then this young lad appears, this 17-year-old lad appears in front of him. And you just wonder what was going through Goliath's mind at that time, until he dawns on him what's happening. And he says, I'm a dog that you send a boy out to me, bellowing across. And David says, you come with your sword and shield, but I come in the name of the God of Abraham, Echad, and Isaac. And today I'm going to take your head off your shoulders. What arrogance! He didn't have a sword with him. He didn't have a sword, but he had his sling. And he was used to using his sling. And it's not a catapult like we know today. You know, this was a sling, probably it had a leather pouch on the end that you put the stone in with 4 pieces of string coming. And David took his 5 stones from the brook, if you remember, and he took one stone and put it in and spun it round and flicked it, and we're told the stone hit the giant in his head. Nothing like that had ever entered his head before. But it didn't kill him. It knocked him out, it stunned him, and then David took Goliath's sword and cut his head off. He came in the name of the God of heaven, our God. And the same God who stood by David will stand by us as well. He stood as one boy, one man amongst all of his nation that had the Spirit of God upon him. I was going to say had the guts, but he had the Spirit of God on him to go out and to fulfill the task that he was meant to fulfill. The second person I wanted to talk about this morning was Elijah. Elijah was this great man of God, one who people are expecting to return before Yeshua returns. He lived the life of a prophet. And you know, the life of a prophet was a lonely one. They wandered from town to town as Adonai instructed them to go. And as far as we can see, Elijah lived like this. Adonai spoke to Elijah and told him to go to Ahab the king. Ahab the king was the husband of Jezebel. And we all know what kind of a woman she was. She had most of the prophets of God killed. She was a horrendous woman. And God told him to go to Ahab. So Elijah goes and he confronts Ahab. And he says to him, you know, gather all your Baal prophets and everyone. Let's meet at Mount Carmel. And we'll decide this day who is the God overall, the God of Israel. So Ahab goes back and he gathers them all on Carmel, and Elijah's on Carmel. And again, most of us know this story of how they built their altar. They danced around their altar all day, crying out to their God, slashing their wrists and everything, you know, pleading for their God to answer, and they didn't. And Elijah mocked them. Elijah stood as one man with 800 Baal prophets, and there was, 400 of the other prophets as well. And he said, okay, enough's enough. And so he ordered this altar to be built and poured all this water over the altar. And you know, wet wood does not light very well. It needs to be dry. And so he built this altar, put the wood on, put the offering on the top of it, and then he steps back and he calls to the God of heaven. And he says, show the people today that there is a God in heaven who answers by fire. And the fire came down, consumed not just the offering, it consumed the wood, it consumed the stone that was built, and everything there, it consumed. And the people saw in amazement. Elijah, we know, orders them to be slaughtered. We've been to Mount Carmel, some of you might have been there, and we stood in the spot and looked over the railing down to the brook down below. And it says nearby there was a brook, and there they slaughtered the 800 Baal prophets of the day. Well, you can understand Jezebel wasn't a bit happy about this when Ahab told her. The word got to Elijah that she was going to kill him. I'm paraphrasing this as you understand and trying to shorten it for you. But Elijah flees. He runs away. He's just stood on this mountain in front of all these people and was triumphant. God honoured his prayer. God destroyed the altar and everything and consumed it. And then they ordered to destroy all the Baal prophets. But because of this one woman, he was frightened and he ran. And it says that he went south and he rested under a tree, and God told him to go to Sinai, Mount Horeb. And there, in the same mountain that Moshe received the Torah, there was a cave. And he went into the cave and rested. And God spoke to him and he said, "What are you doing here?" And so Elijah came out of the cave and stood in the entrance before God. And we're told there was thunder, there was winds, there was lightning. But God wasn't in any of that. And then in the still quietness, in the stillness, God spoke to him. And he says again, "What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing?" And Elijah was having a pity me party, and he said, "Well, I've done this and all these, Jezebel's killed all your prophets, and so we had this, we did this and the other." And God said to him, "Get up and go and anoint Elisha to be your successor." 2 kings he had to anoint. He said, "Because I have saved a remnant of 7,000 people who had not bowed the knee before Baal." He thought he was by himself. He thought he was alone. But no, he wasn't. God had saved 7,000 people who had not bowed the knee before the Baals. And so he went, and we know eventually he had a triumphant entrance into heaven, one that nobody else has, has ever seen. All right, the pagans have their Father Christmas, who rides around on a sleigh, flying in the air with reindeer. Elijah had a fiery chariot that God sent for him to take him up into heaven. What a great man. But even great men have their times of loneliness and questions and everything. You were on an island. We were on an island, actually. Great Britain is an island. A bit bigger, but it's an island. We feel a bit cut off from Europe. We've got that gap between us and that. But you are on an island. And I want to give you a few facts this morning. You probably know some of these. But Malta is predominantly a Catholic island. The Constitution of Malta established the Catholicism as the state of religion, as the Church of England, Anglicanism, is the state religion in the UK. And I just wondered if you knew this. Catholicism, the Catholic Church, in a census in 2021 of young people over the age of 15, said there was 82.6% Catholicism in this country. Eastern Orthodox 3.6%. The Church of England on Malta, 1.3%. Other Christian 1%. Islam 3.9%. Hinduism 1.4%. Buddhism 0.5%. And Judaism 0.3%. 0.3%, not even a 1%. Other religious groups 0.4%, and no religion 5.1%, even more than those who are Jewish. According to a survey, the overwhelming majority of the Maltese population adheres to Christianity, 95.2%, with Catholicism as the main denomination. So, there are 1,249 Jewish people registered over 15 in 2021 on the island of Malta. And I'm sorry to say that Messianic Judaism is probably not even counted in that number. So you are a minority. You are on your own on this island. But God has called you here. God has placed you here for a purpose. You know, when we started, we started with 7 adults and 3 children. And before the pandemic, we were up to about 40. And then after the pandemic, we crashed again. And now we're probably about 20 at the most of people that are there, but we never get 20 to a service. And I think the week before last we had about 10 of us there. But God has placed, I wondered what was happening with us, quite honestly, because we had a lovely little building in Colston in South London, and we lost that building. It's now a Hindu temple. Right? We lost the building, and we were buildingless during the pandemic. And I was isolated, I couldn't go out in any case, so we had to do everything on Zoom. And we lost a few people. Some of our Romanian people went back to Romania because they didn't want to have the vaccination. And they wanted to get out. And so we lost a lot of people. And we searched around and we tried to raise money to buy a building. And in London, the prices in South London are so extortionate that we couldn't. We found a little church in a little village that has accepted us. And the people are old in there. There's probably about a dozen of them, isn't there? And Peter, the vicar's in charge of 3 churches. We meet in a room about this size, but it's 2 classrooms that were classrooms with a partition in the middle. And through glass doors there at one end, you can see the main church, you know, the sanctuary that they have. But that's all fastened off. We have our own little thing. We have our beamer there that's stored there. Our ark goes into the vicar's vestry. You know, they made provision for us. My only thing about it was, way down there in South Godstone, where are the people going to come? There's a railway station just about 2 minutes walk from where we are. But the trains are 1 hour. And I'm saying, how are people going to come to us if we're here? All right, it's good, temporary. And you know, God has brought people to us. We have a family comes from across the other side of London. We're Slough, it's further out from London, outside the M25. We have some coming from Heathrow. We have some come from East London. We have some come from near the south coast. When they all get there, when they're all there. But what I thought was going to be a place where, how are we going to work in this situation? God was new. And we came to a decision, the Rebbitzin and I, and that for the time being, and the state that the world is in at the moment, the last thing we need to be doing is looking for a building. If God provides one, fine, you know. But for us to go looking is a different matter. And God is bringing people to us. Don't despair. You know, like I say, you're not alone. And you as a group together are one. You've titled this conference, I'm Echad, one people. Echad it's a composition word. The rabbis dismiss the idea of, well, they say there's one God. We believe in one God. But they've used the word in the Shema, or God used the word in the Shema, Echad, God is one. But it's a composition. And so, when the Jews say, oh, you've got three gods, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and yet they are saying that God is a composition. It's not just one. If God wanted to say, I am one, totally one, he would have used the word Yachid. But he didn't. He chose to use Echad. You are Echad. You are one, but you are a group of people. And you might be a small group of people, but you've all got skills and gifts to offer to Martin, or rabbinic intern. He's doing his bit to train him to become a full rabbi. It took me 8 years, by the way. 8 years before I was ordained as a rabbi. It took me 2 to be ordained as a Salvation Army officer, but 8 years. But I want to again encourage you, that you and your fellow congregants are not around each other during the week. You may well be the only non-Catholic in your street or your apartment. And as Martin said earlier on, that it's easy to have our faith when we're at home, but when we're out and about amongst our people, that's when we need to have our faith. We need to be that one person, like Daniel, like David, like Elijah. And I was reading this morning as we sat on our balcony, sunning it up before, and I said to the Rebbitzin, find on your Bible, your version, what it actually says here. And I read this out to her. I'm going to find it. Verse 16. It says, this is when the king, Darius, knew he had to throw Daniel into the lion's den. And they took Daniel, and he said to Daniel these words, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. That was the king. So he wasn't by himself. He had a friend. He had a king. He was troubled because he couldn't alter his statute that he'd signed. We had that, didn't we, with Esther and the people at Purim. The king could not go back on what he'd signed, but he could write another one, and that's what he did with Esther. But with here, the king says, your God will himself save you. The king obviously seen Daniel and seen his lifestyle and the way he lived his lifestyle and understood. And then after, on the morning, he never slept, the king. In fact, he waited the whole day and troubled about this to see what he could do. And these satraps came back and said, okay, there's nothing you can do, you've got to follow it through. And so he had to. And he ordered Daniel to be put in. And when he was put in, he went the next morning after having a sleepless night. And he said, Daniel, has your God been able to save you? And Daniel replied to him, yes. You know, the sad thing is that after all of that, he had these plotters thrown into the pit themselves with their children and with their wives. I'm going to say something to God when someday when we're there face to face. Why the children? I have an understanding of why the children, because of generation, and hatred and all that. But again, the sins of the father came upon their children there. And it says that the lions attacked them before they even hit the floor. The lions, I was going to say, did I say tigers there? And then we have this lovely verse in here, that the king says, for he is the living God, endures forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. There is one other that lived a lonely life, and that's Yeshua our Messiah. Yeshua was alone. He was alone in the wilderness for 40 days and nights when Hasatan tempted him. He was alone in his knowledge of the Father. How do I get people to understand, I and the Father are one, he would say. How do I get people to understand that I have come from the Father? And many an argument with those who disbelieved in who he was. He was alone in his final hours as he stood before Pilate, when he was scourged, when he was hung on the execution stake. Nobody could stand with him. There might have been there, the family, but they weren't going through what he was going through. He stood alone on that. And there's a song that said he could have called 10,000 angels to come and set him free, but he died alone. And he died alone for you and me. And when he cried out, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, he's saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why did he say that? Why? Because Yeshua, who knew no sin, became sin. He didn't just take on the sins of the world. He became sin and died there. So sin died with him at Calvary. So for those split seconds before he died, he was separated from God because God could not look upon sin. And then he cries out, it is finished. He knew his work was accomplished. And he died. For those brief moments, he was separated for the first time from the Father and the Ruach. He was alone. And like I said, he could have called 10,000 angels that would have come and rescued him. But he died alone for you and me. If we are called to follow Yeshua's example in all things, and we are, then whether we are together in a group or by ourselves, like David, like Elijah, like Daniel, like Yeshua, we are to witness to what God has done, is doing, and is promised to do for us and anyone else who would be obedient to his will. The thing that started me off on here was a little chorus that we used to sing years ago. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to have a purpose. And dare to make him known. That's what I say to you this morning. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone wherever you are. Because you're not alone. The minute we stand alone ourselves in the name of Yeshua, in the name of God, we are not alone because God is with us. I had to think when I was sitting there, was God alone before he created everything? Did God know loneliness before everything was created? Or was the Messiah, the angels and all, were they there with him in the beginning? That's a theological question, that we could, a philosophical question that we could go on for many years trying to answer. one day we will know. That's the mystery of our belief. That, there's lots of things there we don't understand. We don't understand why the blood of a red heifer, sprinkled on us, or the ashes of a red heifer sprinkled on us, will cleanse. We don't know why blood that stains cleanses us from sin. We can understand now through Yeshua's death. But these are mysteries that if we knew, we'd probably be God ourselves. But the day will come when we can stand before him and we can have all those discussions and chats, and we will understand, we will know. It'd be great to talk to Moses, won't it? And to Abraham and Aaron. All I can say to you is, God bless you all. Shavua Tov, have a good week, and bless and strengthen you. God bless you.